Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Dr. Rafael Arévalo-Ascanio. He recently completed his PhD in applied economics at the University of Antwerp, where his doctoral research proposed a methodology to integrate first and last mile operational decisions into long term strategic supply chain design. Welcome to the show, Rafael.
Thank you, David. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Looking forward for an interesting conversation.
I want to talk about your background. You have an interdisciplinary background spanning Colombia and Belgium. Uh, how does your experience in the logistic infrastructure of a developing economy like Colombia inspire more robust mathematical models compared to organized systems in Europe?
Yes, I think that, what we can see as limitations in research, for us, there are opportunities actually. And what we have in Colombia, we strive for get better or more efficient ways to do things. And in this case, logistics, for example, and transport, if we have infrastructure limitations or the connectivity between regions, so then we need to get better logistics, more efficient logistics to get things running actually.
Mhm. Um, Back in Colombia, you have experience working on vaccine distribution in remote Colombian regions, uh, where you faced some logistic challenges. So, how did your practical experience with vaccine distribution in remote regions change how you define efficiency uh, during a PhD?
Yes, we had the opportunity to work with a research group at the National University of Colombia, the research
Mhm.
group called CEPRO, and we got a project in one of the remote regions in Colombia in the Pacific coast. So when we get there, we were first understanding the supply chain of medicines. And in this, we can see a different from traditional supply chains where optimization, cost minimization is the objective. Here, actually, it's talking about health of well-being of the population. So actually, the efficiency becomes like getting there, accessibility, improving accessibility, actually. There was in this region, for example, extra limitations. There are some municipalities that doesn't have access by road, for example. There was only accessible by the river with inland navigation. So from that, we can see that the efficiency needs to take advantage of different things. And in that case, we work a lot with the local community and with the local authorities because this was about the public health system. So they need to, they are involved, but they need to collaborate with the private entities also. So from
Mhm.
that, we can see already an efficiency dimension that needs to cover different stakeholders. And I think that's very important.
Mhm. Why were you interested taking this problem from economics perspective?
Definitely. Yeah. The thing is that now, actually, from economic perspective, it's one of the dimensions of sustainability, if we call it like that. And then we need to get sustainable systems, economic feasible, but also involving other dimensions. So from that perspective, we cannot ignore that private entities, they are looking for profit, and that's understandable,
Mhm.
but they also need to complement that logic with the social benefits or the social responsibility that is necessary for these kind of systems to work.
Yeah. You mentioned that traditional models treat long haul shipping and local last minute delivery as a separate entities, which you call the silo problem. Given at this silo thinking often leads to a disruption at the hands of points, like which is typically we call it a massive bottleneck. Why has this become such a major financial liability for large companies today?
Yeah, the thing is that a supply chain, if it has different stages, for example, the long haul, transshipment problem from warehouses, from or manufacturing plants to distribution centers, but then the last mile to get to the end consumer, there is a disconnection there, and actually we can see that from the companies. There are now, I mean, recent years, a
Mm,
couple of years ago, that big companies are now taking full responsibility of the entire supply chain. Cases like the Amazon, that are building just entire ecosystems, covering all the different stages. So
mm,
with that is that they need to mitigate the disruptions from this disconnection between the long haul and the last mile, for example. And for example, when you're making a decision, long-term decision, a strategic decision, like where to locate a warehouse, if you don't take into account the burden of the last mile, probably you will get a suboptimal solution, for not saying less, yeah, like very costly mistake can be. So this connection is very important.
you have engineering background, and I'm sure that your engineering background does help you in your PhD research. And I think the model you use is called continuous multiple scale approach for your PhD.
Yes, my engineering background helps me a bit to understand the modeling part.
Mm,
And this is important to see the supply chain.
mm,
Actually, how can we represent that as a model? For
mm,
example, quantifying the flows, the different flows between the different nodes, try to see the network, because actually it's a
mm,
network. When we are designing this network, models help for that. And at this point, I like to see that models are just tools for making decisions.
mm,
So in that case, I propose this new methodology and algorithm, the continuous multi-scale approach, to help us tackle or integrate in this problem that I was mentioning before, the
mm.
integration of the last mile with the big network design problem.
Can you explain how does the continuous multi-scale modeling bridge the gap between high-level corporate strategy and the daily reality of delivery drivers?
Yes, and it's that there are two different problems. The network design is a strategic problem made for the long term, right? That's what we learn in our supply chain basics courses.
Mm,
And last mile is, we can see that as a vehicle routing problem, the drivers doing the deliveries. That's
mm,
planned daily, actually,
mm,
even hourly, some companies do that. So when you are integrating that, there in the literature, there are already some methodologies for doing
mm,
that. But since the dimension is different, the horizon planning has to be different from long term to short term. So in my case is that, or my main argument is that making or relying a decision, long-term decision, which is costly in only one scenario from one vehicle routing, for example,
mm,
it's can create disruptions in the long term. So my idea is to see that last mile, the routing, as a multi-scenario analysis. So for that, what I was is capturing demand behaviors, for example, with geographical patterns. So we can see already that in e-commerce, near cities tend to have higher demand because people
mm.
live there. Yeah, that makes sense. It
Yeah,
sounds simple, but actually capturing that is
yeah,
what makes the modeling more interesting, because then we can aggregate the
mm,
demand considering the geographical patterns, and then use that to run multi-scenario analysis with the stochastic variables, for example, and use that as an input for the network design model.
yeah. In your dissertation, you discuss about this computer models are sometimes difficult to calculate where a building should go while simultaneously planning the routes of hundreds of vans. So I want to ask you, why is it mathematically difficult for model to simultaneously optimize warehouse locations and delivery routes?
Yeah, the traditional models, for example, the location routing problem, looks to make both decisions simultaneously, the location of warehouses and design the delivery routes. But then if the problem goes bigger, like for example in e-commerce, one of the cases I saw, and it was one small case, is that one company can have more than 6,000 deliveries in one day.
Mm,
So if we put that into a model, the scale of the model becomes complex to solve optimally with the solvers we have. There
mm,
are already some techniques like the heuristics, meta-heuristics to escape optimality, but and helping to get good estimates
mm.
about that. So that's why I also built an algorithm to help reduce with limited information and
Yeah.
help us to get good estimations of what can be the result.
Yeah. Um, Obviously, this the distribution costs can varies from rural delivery and the urban delivery, and I'm sure that rural delivery is notoriously expensive. So, so I want to ask you, how does your model prove that competing carriers, let's give some example, let's say FedEx or the United States Postal Services, can actually save money and reduce emissions by sharing regional distribution centers?
Yeah, it sounds quite intuitive if we see that when these companies can at some level coordinate the distribution, they
Mm,
share a distribution center. There is an extra cost of running that new distribution centers, but then they save costs or burden, like minimize distance in transit,
mm,
in
mm,
transport.
mm,
So if we minimize distances, then we are minimizing like the burden to the environment, like emissions, for example, but also externalities like
mm,
congestions and this accidentality in streets. So the idea is that if they can share, they can uh, use better transport capacity. For example, workload of the vehicles will
mm,
be expected to be higher a bit, and then with that they take advantage of this, getting closer to the end user.
mm. And when think of collaboration, I think the airlines, the commercial lines do a slightly better job because they share different routes like airspaces. Um, did you get a chance to look at the aviation models in your literature review just to see what kind of modeling they do for their distribution of the routes and the sharing the airspace?
Yeah, it's interesting, and actually, now that you mention it, the in the aviation industry, they have the alliances actually, and they one airline can sell the tickets for the other, or
Yeah.
you fly, you buy your tickets in one airline, but your flight is operated by another one
Mm,
from the same alliance. So they have
mm,
this collaboration scheme very strong. What we see in, for example, in e-commerce is that companies are still protective of their image.
mm,
And even if you receive your package, they would like that the band that delivers your package says the name of their company.
mm,
So that actually creates some difficulties for companies to collaborate in that sense.
mm,
In the literature is already some strategies for that, like the white brand carrier, like
mm,
something neutral that can perform the delivery and getting the benefits for both of the or more of the companies that are collaborating.
yeah. Uh, from a consumer perspective, so there's like a trade-off. Like I think because we're living in such a fast pace, so we expect our delivery to arrive fast. But then
Mhm.
there is also a sustainability issue as well. Can network design achieve both speed and sustainability, or must consumer choose one over the other?
Uh, to answer the first part of the question, yes, I think better models can achieve both objectives fairly reasonably, but also we need to get, and I think that's a cultural thing, that we need to consume more responsibly, and that's from the consumer side. And they can get this trade-off to choose between being sustainable or receiving the package when they want, for example, same day deliveries or the next day. Better models can help to get that. For example, I mean, being fast doesn't necessarily mean being not sustainable. Yeah, there's no vehicles, new technologies that can help to do this. But there's definitely, if the company can plan better, for example, deciding when to deliver your package instead of being forced to deliver it tomorrow, they can then prepare a better distribution route, use the whole capacity of the vehicle, for example. So then the emissions per package will decrease if they use the entire capacity, for example.
Mm. In your recent research, you have discussed integrating social and environmental objectives into the location routing problem. To help us understand, can you give a example of how your mathematical model quantifies something intangible like reducing noise pollution in a neighborhood to compare it against a dollar cost, the profit?
Yes, actually, there is a very nice methodology that already standardizes or quantify the, the implications of accidentality, the noise, the pollution in general, and transform that into costs. For example, in the case, let's take accidents as a case.
Mm,
They made an entire analysis to see one accident, what is the cost of one accident, even if I mean a fatal accident or just the small injuries, and they can get to a factor where you can penalize, for example, the accidentality external cost per kilometer driven.
mm,
So if we take that standardized methodology, it's similar for emissions, for example. Now the emission factors standards are per kilometers driven or ton kilometer in case of cargo. If we are minimizing distance, then we can easily translate that distance, the actual driven distance, but also the avoided or minimized distance in terms of costs, emissions, and the external cost, the externalities to society.
Practical application of your research. Um, as the fashion industry faces pressure to be more circular, how can your methodology help the fashion industry manage take back logistics for old clothing without doubling transportation costs?
That's the million question, I think. Yeah, because there is necessary to be a burden in logistics if these take back programs continue like
Mm,
they are now. Even we can see already the I mean it's a fast industry
mm,
that they can offer you return for free, like you just return it. I mean that's creating logistics activity and creating distance, creating costs for these companies.
mm,
So if we don't consider the consumer in that side, then we just need, or the only tool that we have is to improve operational efficiency in that sense. For that, models helps. But then again, I think the consumer plays an important role in there.
mm. Okay. So, Rafael, you have successfully defended your dissertation. Uh, what is next for you?
Yes, I really like academia. I'm passionate for research, so I see myself in the long term in the academia. So right now, for me, the natural step is doing a postdoc or trying to find a position. So right now, I still working at the University of Antwerp as a postdoc researcher.
Mm,
We are working in one project for sustainable fuels for road transport, for example, alternative sustainable fuels, but also from my research in the PhD, I get very interested in the role of consumers in and the influence consumers has in these logistics operations.
mm,
So I plan also to keep working on that, writing some grant proposals and apply here and there just
mm.
to see how it goes.
As you look forward the future of this field, how much do you think human behavior or AI will change the math, the models?
Considerably, I think. And the thing is that if we now take into account the consumer choices, the decisions that they make, it's very important to include that in our models to make the models more reliable. So then we need to change methodologies, include new parameters. We can see, for example, consumer from behavioral economics and see all the decisions, the implications that those decisions has in the design or planning of this logistics operation. So definitely we need to, I mean, we need to adapt models. It's not that we need to change them, probably. I mean, it's not that we need to do it, have to do it, but we need to be consistent with what is happening in reality. And if we want to get better models, more accurate models, the idea is to get closer to what reality is.
Mm. Rafael, for students who are listening this conversation and who want to follow your footsteps, what is your advice? to them?
For PhD students in general is enjoy the PhD actually. I can see many cases where people complain. Of course, I complained also at the time. Of course, you get frustrated with some things, you get excited there, but the idea is to enjoy it overall because that's very important. And if you like it, then you will find a way. And with that, I believe you can get more impactful research because you are caring about it.
Mm, yeah. And any specific advice, the current supply chain, the network design, that is something they can explore.
Yeah, definitely. I think everything is about decisions. So yeah, we can get for example, the supply chain feel more to the psychological side of
Mm,
how consumer thinks or what are their beliefs and how that will impact their decisions. There are many things that we can also improve. And in my case, I'm very interested now in this, as I mentioned before, this relationship of network design that has been purely a company focus in the past, cost minimization, for example, one and including this new perspective from outside, from the consumer perspective, for example.
mm, mm. Rafael, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your research. Wishing you the best in your postdoctoral journey.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the interesting questions and for the discussions. And yeah, thanks for this spotlight that I hope it will be helpful for someone.